Hi guys, in the build we will cover today, we combine the iconic Detonate Dead from Path of Exile 1 for mapping with the brand new Physical Spell Bonestorm for bossing. All this coupled with the excellent defenses and crit scaling provided by the Blood Mage Ascendency will create a very satisfying and well-rounded tanky build. So, just a heads up that while I talk about the build, I'm playing some showcases in the background, but if you want to navigate to a specific content showcase, you can do so by just going to the end of the video using the timestamps down below, if you don't want to listen to me talk. Okay, so let's begin by examining the build's strengths and weaknesses. The main strengths of the build are, it's extremely satisfying and strong map. I'm having lots of fun playing with it. It's very, very satisfying to see all the Detonate Dead pops just blowing up packs. Very, very fun to play. It's also a solid bosser. Bonestorm is an incredibly strong single target ability for bossing. It does have some mana issues in that you need to solve mana, but it's not too bad to solve it, and it makes for an excellent bosser overall. It's also simple to build and play. It's not a particularly complex build. None of my builds ever are that complex. I don't like making complex builds. I like to make simple builds that anybody can play and make. Next of all, it's easy and comfortable leveling in campaign. I loved the campaign with it. I tried Essence Drain Contagion for my leveling and I hated it. It was awful. I switched Detonate Dead and Bonestorm and it was really, really good and comfortable. Super, super chilled. Didn't really need much gear either, so definitely recommend it for leveling. Next point, it's very durable, especially in their Mind-over-Matter-Lite Variant that I will talk about below, but we are very, very tanky and yeah, it's very, very rare for me to die. Next one, we do not rely on clunky minion AI for Detonate Dead mapping like some other Detonate Dead variants do. A lot of Detonate Dead builds right now use sacrifice and minion health scaling on skeletal brutes, which is very strong. I find it a little bit clunky for mapping because first of all you need to be targeting the minions with your Detonate Dead, which I don't like, and also the minions get stuck and then you can't exactly explode them where you want them, so I don't really like it. So I prefer scaling the sort of spell damage version of Detonate Dead. Works very well, in my opinion, and we don't need to rely on minions. And finally, strength, maybe a personal opinion, but this is a non-meta build. There's not that many people playing it or talking about it, and I think it's quite interesting and unique. It uses a lot of new mechanics, so I think for me that's a strength of the build as well. However, of course, the build does not excel at everything. It has some sort of weaknesses. So the main weaknesses of this build are, first of all, you need to be micromanaging the way you walk around and have to pick up the orbs for Sanguimancy. And also the energy shield orbs if you're using the Grim Feast gem, which we are at this point until it gets nerfed, presumably in the future. When it gets nerfed, it's no big deal. We can just scope out of it and probably get Eldritch Battery instead of Grim Feast, and it's going to work just as well in my opinion. Second weakness is that it's Bonestorm is a targeted spell. So it's not great at very mobile bosses, like you've got this witch, right, on the broom that's going around. You're not going to hit her with your Bonestorm until she's off that, so it's kind of annoying for stuff like that. Thankfully, there's loads of big stationary bosses in the game, so it's not common that it's an issue. And finally, third weakness is its Delirium. It's not very, very good at Delirium because Delirium monsters do not leave corpses behind, so you cannot detonate them. You have to just be mostly using Bone Cage or looking for non-Delirium monsters in the map to kill them and then explode. Not a huge deal. Delirium's not all that amazing in my opinion, currently in its current state anyway, so not a big loss, but you're not going to be smashing through Delirium. So, with the strengths and weaknesses of the build out of the way, let's wrap up the introduction and look into the details of the build using our Mobalytics guide. However, just before we do, just wanted to say that I will keep this build updated as long as it's viable, and any future changes will be shared in the top pinned comment on this video. So if you come in here in the future, make sure to check out the pinned comment for any build updates or changes. They will definitely be there. If there's nothing there, it means the build is still as is. Okay, so let's take a look at the Mobalytics section of the guide. So we begin with a little bit intro, strengths and weaknesses, which I just talked about anyway, so we can skip over those. Then we have this Mind-over-Matter-Lite version that I want to talk about a little bit. So basically what we do is we pick up, we invest 10 passive points to pick up 24% of damage taken as mana nodes on the tree, also a little bit of mana recoup. And this combined with the Grasping Wounds Ascendency of Blood Mage means we only take 51% of hits from life initially, 24% from mana, and 25% as damage over time over 4 seconds, I believe it is. This means we only take half the damage from life, from hits, which is very, very strong. Very, very good. This is combined with our 6k HP pool and 4k energy shield pool when mapping. We have approximately 3k health and 2k energy shield, just by default, but then that's doubled using the Sanguimancy and using Grimfeast for a total of 10k plus effective health points. And this makes us very resistant to hits. I mean, this is very, very good. It's very unlikely anything in the game will one-shotters, which makes this build feel very comfortable and tanky, even in T18s. I'm walking through T18s without many issues. However, if you obviously do not want to pursue this Mind-over-Matter-Lite version, you can just skip those 10 nodes and go for this crit physical shredding force cluster nearby on the tree that you can check out later. Not a problem. I'm personally a fan of it. Someone recommended it to me on Reddit. Checked it out. I really like it, so shout out to whoever that was. If you don't like it, obviously you don't need to go this way. You can just go for some more damage. For what it's worth, this Mind-over-Matter-Lite version loses about 10 to 15% DPS for this extra bit of survivability. In my opinion, that's worth it. For other notes, I've just said that I do think Blood Mage overall is underperforming. I think a lot of people think this, so I do think there will actually be a buff to Blood Mage at some point in the future. If I were to guess, I would say there's going to be some decrease on the mana and health cost of abilities, because the scaling of mana and health costs, you know, when like skills get like level 30 is insane. So I think we'll probably have some reduced costs of our abilities. If I were to guess, maybe there'll be some other changes. But bottom line, I think probably this build is likely to get stronger rather than weaker. Is this build hardcore and SSF viable? In my opinion, yes. I've shredded through campaign with no issues. Very, very easy. I don't think there's anything super... any uniques that are super important for this build. So I think it's SSF viable as well. So that's obviously a strength as well, if that's what you're into. So next, let's take a look at the equipment that we should get. Obviously, I've prepared some items here in Mobalytics. However, all the affixes I chose for all these items are basically perfect. Now, there's no real crafting in Path of Exile 2, so you can't guarantee most of these affixes, but it just gives you an idea of what to aim for. Obviously, you're not going to have items quite as good as these. In general, the priority for damage goes something like levels of spells, projectiles, physical spells. We can get +5 physical spell skills on the wand, +2 level of all spell skills on the focus, and we can have +3 level of all spell skills or +3 to level of all projectile skills. Both work just as well for Bonestorm on the amulet for a +10 total. Other than that, cast speed is very good, then crit chance, crit damage, and finally some sort of spell damage, physical spell damage combined as well. A bunch of these, you definitely want to pick up quite a few of those. In addition, you want to be getting as much strength, life as possible, wherever possible, and increased life as well if possible on the amulet. Quite a rare mod, quite tough to get. 7 to 8 roll, very tough. Maybe you should settle for like 5 or 6% as well. And obviously, the one unique item we use is the Morior Invictus. I use it with +5% to maximum health per rune and +10% all res per rune. Ideally, you would aim for a 5 rune corrupted one that really sorts out your elemental resistances, which frees up all the sockets on all the other pieces to get, you know, that spell damage, crit chance. So quite important in my opinion, and also obviously the extra maximum health scales for us very well, given that we Blood Mage, and also we benefit from the mage maximum health for the crit scaling for the Ascendency. Obviously can't pick up all the resistances purely for this item, so you'll want to be picking up a few bits and pieces, some attributes and resistance on other items. Usually I find the boots, helmet and rings sort of the freest to be able to pick up a resistance or two to top everything out. Other notes for the wand, you kind of want to try to aim for the attuned wand base. This gives you the mana drain ability, which in prolonged boss fights can sometimes be useful. The mana cost of Bonestorm is pretty high, so if you have an attuned wand, that can help you maintain that mana in prolonged fights. In the offhand, there is a strat of using an Omen Scepter that currently works. You can have a wand as your main hand, Scepter as your offhand. You can use the Malice Aura for more base crit. You can also get extra Spirit, which you can then use to run like double Blasphemy Curse setup or maybe something cast on crit. But we do give up the 2 levels of spell skills and a bunch of like damage modifiers. I think it might be worth it. It's kind of close, but I actually think that this might be bugged. I don't think they aim for you to be able to wield Scepter in the offhand. Maybe, we'll see. I think this is bugged, so I'm not doing it, but just putting it out there, something to consider. The amulet, as mentioned, spell skills and projectile skills both work. For the body armor, if you can't afford Moria, then obviously just go for a rare chest piece with resistances and life, and then you'll just need to pick up a little bit more resistances on your other gear because you won't get as much from a rare chest piece as you will from Moria. In gloves, I really like to go for gain mana per enemy killed. I think it's quite easy to get on the glove slot because we do need some mana regen for spamming Detonate Dead in maps. You should aim to get that somewhere. I also have some recoup mana, damage taken recouped as mana on my amulet, I believe, which also helps a lot. Basically, you do need some way of solving mana issues. I find that the gain mana per enemy killed is usually the best way of doing it. Once you have like 30 plus, you will not run out of mana in maps. For duels, you want something like spell damage, crit chance, crit damage bonus, crit spell damage bonus. Second prefix, not really too important. I didn't really see anything that useful. And also just a note, for a very high budget setup, you could have that Against the Darkness unique duel with plus spirit. That would also enable us like a double curse blasphemy setup, or maybe like a cast on crit build, something like that. Just something to consider. Obviously, this is super expensive at the moment. It's like 30 divs or something. So probably not very realistic for most builds, but just something to consider. And just very quickly to give you a realistic idea of what you can aim for, I'm just going to quickly highlight the gear pieces I have for comparison. Obviously not as good as the ones in Mobalytics because that's not quite possible. So on my wand, I have some physical spell skills, I have some spell physical damage, I have some crit chance for spells, and I have some cast speed. In the helmet, I have some life, mana, and just a resistance piece. I found this quite easy to get a massive resistances helmet to help out with your resistances. On the focus, I have +2 to all spell skills, a little bit of res, a little bit of spell damage, spell physical damage. In the amulet, I have +3 to all projectiles. I have some damage taken recouped as mana, a little bit of life, a little bit of increased maximum life. One ring here, I have some life, some resistances, some strength. Nothing really too great on that one, to be honest. Just resistances, basically. Here we have some strength, resistances, cast speed, a little bit of life, a little bit of rarity. Obviously, we have the Moria, like I mentioned, with maximum life and all elemental resistances per socketed rune. I go for the Chaos Resistance runes. I find that the easiest way to cap my Chaos Resistance, especially with the 10% Chaos Resistance from campaign. In my gloves, like I mentioned, I have mana per enemy killed, some strength, some life. On the belt, I have +2 charm slots, a little bit of res, lots of life, some armor. And on the boots, obviously, I have movement speed, some life, some mana, some strength. Nothing too amazing. In this flask, I recommend recovery applied instantly and increased charges. I think this is, by the way, a perfect flask. I could not get this any better if I tried. This is a top roll on the recovery applied instantly, and basically a top roll of the increased charge. Almost the top roll of the increased charge, but this basically lets me use it 12 times. If I get into a sticky situation, I need to spam the instant recovery. Then I have amount recovered and charges gained, mana life flask. That one could be a bit better. For the charms, I used freeze immunity, stun immunity, and chaos resistance on chaos damage from hit. And for the jewels, like I mentioned, it's just a little bit of a highlight. I have some spell damage, some critical hit chance, critical spell damage bonus, stuff like this. Just stuff to scale our crits as much as possible. Moving on from the gear, we're going to take a look at the skill gems. So obviously we have Mana Drain, like I mentioned, from the Attuned Wand base. We have the Life Remnants, which is from our Ascendency. Then we have Detonate Dead, which is the ability used for clearing. Pretty obvious. I use Spell Echo, very good. I use Magnified Effect to make the explosion a little bit bigger. I use Ambush to have more crit chance for enemies on full life. Again, works really well for our build. We really do want to be using that crit chance. And then the last two aren't very important, really. I use Mobility, which just helps us move faster. It feels really good to have this one. And for the last one, I have Execute, which deals more damage to enemies on low life. This shouldn't be needed that often. Generally speaking, you want to be blowing up enemies in one hit. But if you don't, especially for rares, this might help a little bit. Generally, I don't know what the 6th link should be here. I think Heft doesn't work. Brutality we use on Bonestorm. So honestly, the 6th gem slot, you can put something else in Detonate Dead if you want. For Bonestorm, we use Scattershot. This is very good because it really lowers our cost to cast, because the mana cost is really quite high at high level. I have like level 30 Bonestorm, and the cost is really, really high. So this, because it lowers the cast speed, lowers our mana cost, but also because it then generates 3 projectiles instead of 1 every time it generates a projectile. It lets us stack up the projectiles much quicker. I think this is very, very fast. I think this seems to lower the DPS in the tooltip in the game, but I think that's because the tooltip shows you damage per projectile. What it doesn't account for that this allows you to generate 3 times as many projectiles. So even though it lowers your DPS per projectile, you generate so many more projectiles, it does increase your damage overall. So it's a little bit deceptive, so keep that in mind. But I think this is a very, very, very good support gem for Bonestorm. After that, we have Brutality, just gives you much more lots of physical damage. Arcane Tempo, which scales, the cast speed, makes it feel a little bit better. Effectively adds us lots of damage as well. Here I have Considered Casting, which kind of counteracts that. We have a little bit less cast speed, but this gives a lot more damage with the hits. Really, really good as well for damage. And finally, I have Physical Mastery. I think this one is the best for damage currently. I tweaked and I played with a few of the support gems possible. This one was given as the most sheet DPS. So I think this one's probably better. It is possible you may be able to put something else in that 6th slot if you play around. I think for me, this one was the best one. For Bone Cage, we mostly use it for clearing. We have Lockdown, which helps basically lock enemies in place for sure. We have Spell Cascade, very, very, very good. Definitely use this one. It basically creates a triple Bone Cage. I have Inspiration, because I didn't really know what else to put in here, but it lowers the cost. Obviously, it lowers our health cost as well because of our Ascendency, so that's quite helpful to stick it somewhere. And I also put Lacerate in there to inflict bleeding. Not very important because we don't deal that much damage with the Bone Cage anyway, but there's really nothing else to stick in there, so may as well put a little bleed when you use it. Then I use Blasphemy, in which I have Enfeeble and also Clarity because I have 10 Spirit left over. You could put this Clarity in Life Remnants as well, doesn't matter. Obviously, it doesn't need to be in Blasphemy. But gives us a little bit of mana regen because we have 10 Spirit left over. And we use Grim Feast to generate extra energy shield. Not super important. When Grim Feast gets nerfed, I would just remove energy shield nodes. I would remove Grim Feast and I would apply the Eldritch Battery instead. What else worth noting? Nothing really worth noting. You can read some of the comments I made if you want to, but it's nothing really that controversial, I think. If you have any questions or comments, suggestions, I'll be happy to listen to them, maybe switch some stuff out in here. Now moving on to the passive tree, just a couple of things to mention before we look at some of the points. First of all, do not choose your first Ascendency, which is Sanguinmancy, until you have 4 points to also pick up the Vitality Siphon, which gives you spell damage, leases life. Otherwise, the first Ascendancy will just kill you during mapping. So don't bother, just get 2 Ascendancies at once and just assign the first 4 points. After that, I pick up, as the third one, I pick up Grasping Wounds. And as the 4th one, I pick up Gore Spike. However, again, I have a point about Gore Spike. Currently, it doesn't increase your sheet DPS, which makes me question whether it's working or not. I know some people have been talking about it. I'm not sure if it's working or not. So I actually currently use the one, I can't see it now. And here, let me go into the tree bigger. Oh God, Mobalytics not working. There we go. Apologies for that. So I actually have Blood Barbs assigned now, which gives me a little bit of extra damage as extra physical damage, and it also adds some bleeding magnitude. Not super important, but adds a little bit more damage. Once I'm sure that Gore Spike is working, I will definitely be using Gore Spike. This gives us crit damage bonus per 40 life. It doesn't state maximum life, so I presume it means current life, which, when we can have up to 7,000 life when mapping. This is almost 200% critical damage bonus. Very, very good, very, very strong. Definitely want to be using that one, assuming that it's working. Moving on, for Anoint, I use Direct Approach. I think I would like Deadly Force more, but that one is really expensive, so you can look into both of those. Both are fine. For leveling, honestly, this build is super comfortable and easy. Just focus on the crit and damage nodes like spell damage, crit chance, finish off, focus all those nodes, and don't pick up any energy shield or the mind over matter nodes until the end. Pick those up right at the end once you're sort of in mapping, just to help you scale the build. And once the above tree, that you can look in here, once all this is complete, you can then that's 88, level 88. You can then pick up a few more increased critical damage bonus nodes in and around some of the clusters, like just to show you, for example, in this here top one, you have a couple of here, which is critical spell damage bonus, stuff like this. Pick this up right at the end. I think there's 7 of those total, which means that you can use this tree up to a level 95. And if you do not want to pursue the Mind-over-Matter-Lite version of the build I spoke about, you can pick up this cluster right here. It has some increased physical damage, some crit chance, critical spell bonus, crit chance for spells, crit chance for spells. I basically pick up this cluster over here if I remove the Mind-over-Matter-Lite, which is this stuff here, and also this stuff here. Damage taken from mana before life. This is basically the Mind-over-Matter-Lite that I talk about. This basically sums up the passive tree. For the Atlas tree, I haven't actually prepared anything because it doesn't really matter too much what you go for. You can go for whatever you want. The only note I will mention is what I mentioned before, that Delirium is not very good. I would rate Delirium on this at like 3 out of 10. It's really not very good because of the fact that Delirium does not leave monster corpses behind, so you cannot use Detonate Dead. So you're basically just using Bone Cage, which is not as strong because this build does not focus on Bone Cage. However, you're pretty good at everything else. I mean, you're really good at Breach. I'd give like an 8 out of 10 on Breach on this build, about 9 out of 10 for Expedition. Expedition is very, very good. I really enjoy doing Expedition. This is the one I'm focusing. And Ritual is fine as well. Unfortunately, Ritual is just not very good at the moment in its current state. However, we do pretty well at Ritual, so you can feel free to do all that as well. And this pretty much sums up everything I want to talk about in this video. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me out a ton, especially as a new Path of Exile content creator, so I would be very, very grateful. And anyway, I'm also planning to be making updates to this build. I really enjoyed this build, so you know, if you subscribe, you will see those update videos when they are published. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask either in the comments down below or by reaching out to me in my Discord server, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. Anyway, I'll play a few showcases now, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.